The belief in modern apostles and prophets as spiritual authorities within the Church, held by the NAR, comes with serious consequences. In many cases, these individuals are granted authoritarian control. As leaders of a group convinced they are engaged in spiritual warfare within a vivid realm of angels and demons, these authoritarian figures assume the role of generals in an army. The rank-and-file members, serving merely as privates, are enlisted in a battle they do not fully comprehend. The concept is widely promoted in the series titled God's Generals, which, to the NAR, has become akin to the books of Kings from the Old Testament. In these works, author Roberts Liardon chronicles the lineage of pivotal figures in the NAR's formation, dubbing some of the most influential among them as, quote, generals. This viewpoint suggests that, historically, the Holy Spirit has opted to guide Christians through individual leaders rather than directly through the believers' hearts, in opposition to New Testament teachings such as Romans 5 verse 5. Many of the men and women chosen as key figures were hardly worthy of their titles, and some were outright evil. Arguably, a few could be described as generals for the forces of Satan rather than of God. Some of the worst built their religious and financial empires on the backs of others just as evil. Yet, some truly viewed themselves as generals in God's army, engaged in spiritual, and sometimes physical, battles against the enemy. Among them, Pentecostal General Charles Fox Parham was involved in various scandals, including magic gold elixirs, quests for the Ark of the Covenant, and accusations from numerous parents of sexual crimes against their children. He confessed to at least one of them. Foursquare General Amy Semple McPherson staged a fake kidnapping to cover up sexual affairs and was implicated in real estate scams near a fake megachurch. Pentecostal General John G. Lake has been labeled a conman for a variety of false claims and scams, the most egregious involving an arrest for fraudulent stock sales to his own congregation. Charismatic General Catherine Kuhlman rented hundreds of wheelchairs for her faith-healing crusades so that able-bodied attendees could rise from them as part of a deceptive, staged act. Like Frank Sanford, latter-reign General William Branham, leader of the post-World War II healing revival, convinced his followers he was the manifestation of Elijah the prophet through numerous failed or inaccurate predictions and fraudulent healing claims. Living in the age of information, when critical aspects of their lives and ministries are now widely known, huge questions are raised. Why do leaders of the NAR give such reverence to con artists, criminals, and child predators? To find out, we must examine the most famous of the Elijah con artists, God's General, John Alexander Dowie. Scottish-American faith healer John Alexander Dowie is often considered the prototype for the modern apostles and prophets of the NAR. He not only created a financial empire but also attempted to establish a theocracy, gaining himself a somewhat successful control over politics. Known for his boisterous claims of direct communication with God and the ability to heal the sick, Dowie is regarded by many as the first modern apostle. After being involved in numerous scandals in Australia, including the controversial takeover of a church from a critically ill pastor and misusing the church funds, Dowie migrated to the United States, seeking new opportunities for his divine healing scheme. Starting in San Francisco and eventually moving to Los Angeles, Dowie convinced people of his healing powers by sharing letters of testimony, allegedly from those he had cured in other cities. Initially, his strategy was highly successful, earning him significant media attention with headlines such as Modern Miracles. Some meetings featured individuals who testified about their improvements after receiving Dowie's faith cure, and reporters covered these events without any critical analysis or investigative effort. Reporters in Oakland were not so easily impressed by the letters and few witnesses, and they reserved their praise until they witnessed an actual healing. People seeking a miraculous cure continued to come, arriving hopeful but leaving with their afflictions unchanged. One particularly sad case involved a boy deformed by a spinal disease who approached Dowie for the faith cure. Both reporters and the audience eagerly watched for a miracle, but none occurred. A reporter from the Oakland Tribune waited for an hour and 20 minutes to see any sign of improvement, but, as with the boy with the spinal disease, each person who received their alleged healing remained unchanged. The conflict between Dowie and the newspapers set the stage for many future confrontations in both his ministry and those who modeled their apostle strategies after him. Whenever a critical article about Dowie was published, he labeled the reporters, and often the newspapers themselves, as enemies of Christ, persuading his followers that they could not be trusted. As reporting evolved from questioning his credibility to exposing his fraudulent claims, Dowie's followers were quickly conditioned to abandon critical thinking and accept his statements at face value. In the end, the newspapers on the West Coast gained the upper hand by launching an awareness campaign to educate residents about Dowie's methods. Before long, even many of his faithful followers began to notice that all of Dowie's alleged healings were never local and always occurred in another county. Some regular attendees were driven to the brink of insanity and others sought legal counsel for damages. One woman in particular was offended by Dowie's insulting labels such as Jezebel or harlot and sued him for slander. The West Coast was no longer a fertile ground for harvesting victims for his scam, and Dowie was forced to relocate to the Midwest. The timing of Dowie's move was fortuitous, and his choice of location strategic. He established his base in Chicago just as the city was preparing for the World's Columbian Exposition, also known as Chicago's World's Fair. By the time the fair opened in 1893, Dowie had rented a property adjacent to the fair's entrance with a rickety wooden building later to be called the Little Wooden Hut. The name was fitting, as the structure was essentially a small wooden building, albeit with a facade resembling a full-sized church to give the appearance of an established place of worship. As visitors passed by his makeshift church, Dowie stood out front, ready to draw them in to experience his faith cure during services held at 10:30 a.m., 2:30 and 7:30 p.m. Dowie's makeshift church stood directly opposite Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, just outside the entrance of the fair. Fortunately for Dowie, because Buffalo Bill's niece, Sadie Cody, who claimed to have been healed by Dowie's faith cure, played a significant role in launching his new denomination, the Christian Catholic Church. After her story was published in the Chicago Tribune, thousands of visitors flocked to Dowie, eager for a glimpse of a miracle. The sudden surge in fame gave Dowie the opportunity to expand his operations. The Christian Catholic Church grew to include 5 locations and established makeshift healing homes for those seeking cures to reside in until they were healed. Letters from across the United States flooded in, with those containing substantial sums of money receiving priority for a response and an invitation. One witness later testified that Dowie ignored any letter that did not include money. Furthermore, those chosen to reside in the healing homes were carefully vetted by Dowie's staff and selected based on their personal wealth. Dreams of being healed were quickly dashed upon entering Dowie's healing homes. Patients found themselves alongside individuals with contagious and deadly diseases and those suffering from severe mental health issues, with no proper procedures in place to ensure their safety. Those who escaped or were expelled from the homes reported that Dowie had violently coerced them into submission. Others, whom Dowie declared cured, were helplessly cast out onto the streets, still suffering. All the while, Dowie demanded more money to provide for them. One neighbor described the horrors. Quote, "I have seen the streets of the neighborhood filled with cripples, in the dead of winter, who had been driven from their invalid chairs, stripped of their crutches and turned forth cured, or undergoing the process of being cured. They have slipped about on the ice, and have fallen upon the street to be picked up by sympathetic neighbors, while Dowie strode among them with a head aloft blind to their suffering and cries for help." Those expelled from the healing homes lost more than just a chance at Dowie's faith cure. In the Christian Catholic Church, salvation was directly linked to healing. Dowie introduced a doctrine asserting that patients he could not heal were doomed, proclaiming, if Christians expect to reach heaven, they must first be cured of all diseases that flesh is heir to. This doctrine was later carried forward into the latter rain movement and beyond by a high-ranking member of Dowie's sect, founding member of the Assemblies of God, and member of the Christian and Missionary Alliance, Fred Francis Bosworth. Leaders of the healing revivals such as William Branham called it the gospel of divine healing. However, it was certainly not good news, or gospel, for those who had given Dowie their life savings in exchange for a chance at a bed in the healing homes, only to be turned away as hopeless cases, especially for those who contracted contagious diseases from neighboring beds. This posed a significant problem for city officials, who recognized that Dowie was a rank imposter, effectively operating hospitals without any medical experience, equipment, or medicine. Dowie's faith cure doctrine prohibited medical science or treatment, which resulted in almost countless civil and criminal cases against him in Chicago, ranging from theft and misuse of funds to health code violations over the frequent deaths. Some of the deaths were preventable with proper medical care. It was later learned that others, such as John G. Lake, were involved in fraudulent strategies to lure unsuspecting people into Dowie's healing homes. Lake and his family were instrumental in convincing audiences of Dowie's faith cure, and some of the alleged cures were simply outlandish. In one instance, Lake claimed that his sister had 5 cancers and that he himself reached into her chest and pulled out black tumors. Some scams involved Lake's family standing by to send a telegram of their alleged healing, while Dowie claimed that he was remotely administering a faith cure. According to the written records of the events, Lake, his brother, 2 of his sisters, 3 sons, and his wife were all rescued from near death multiple times over the course of just 8 years. It should come as no surprise that Lake's healing revival meetings frequently featured distant healings, unstage extraction of tumors, and more. Dowie's rise to fame came at the height of popularity of British Israelism in the United States. The same year Buffalo Bill's niece helped launch Dowie's ministry, Cal Totten resigned from his position at Yale to devote his full time to the spreading of British Israelism through books and lectures on biblical chronology, biblical prophecy, the Great Pyramid, British Israelism, and other esoteric subjects, all of which Dowie leveraged to make his Christian Catholic Church more appealing. It was highly successful. In just 10 years' time, Dowie had amassed $15 million. That's over $500 million in 2024. Like his contemporary, Frank Sanford, Dowie envisioned his church seizing control of Jerusalem for their cause and incorporated British Israel symbolism into his sect. His church buildings were named Zion, after the hill on which Jerusalem sits and which is interchangeably used to refer to the city itself. After facing an overwhelming amount of legal challenges in Chicago, Dowie founded the city of Zion, located north of Chicago on Lake Michigan. Lots in the new city were leased for as much as $150,000. That is $5.5 million in 2024. Worse, the lease term was for 1,000 years. Dowie convinced his followers that was due to the 1,000-year reign of Christ, according to Revelation 20. Dowie believed that at the end of his life, quote, the millennium will have set in and he would be back in 1,000 years. Dowie's claim that he was the manifestation of Elijah the prophet from the Old Testament was widely known, as were his many ethical, civil, and criminal violations. In his time, Dowie became the most notorious religious con artist covered by newspapers worldwide. The problems he introduced into 20th century Christianity have been the subject of countless books and theological studies. Besides the God's General series and a few individuals who modeled their religious strategies after Dowie's empire, very few Christians aware of Dowie's behavior would regard it as part of a Christian movement. How did John Alexander Dowie's claim to be Elijah the Restorer and the first apostle influence the development of apostolic faith, and how did this evolve into the prophets and apostles of the NAR? How did his views on the millennium and Christ's rule from Zion shape the NAR's restoration and dominionism doctrines? To understand these transitions, we must first examine the genesis of modern Pentecostalism, the history that many Pentecostal historians have attempted to erase.